which does play a very big factor into how the plant grows. And then there's fertilizer nutrients as well as pest and weed control. So all of those steps happen within the grow environment. And all we're saying is to the growers, and especially the investors that are backing the growers, to take a hard look at what you're using to grow before this problem happens.
Because realize there's sometimes out there's some really pretty packaging. However, you may not like what's in the package.
Well, judging a book by the cover isn't always the best way to go when you're talking about medicine. Yeah, but again, it just goes back to awareness. And, the more the growers are aware, the manufacturers are aware, and the consumers are aware, we can probably save some lives. So
right, and the certificates of analysis are really important. When you start coming down to a lot of this, when you have, especially when you're utilizing an independent third-party laboratory to do the testing, to do the analysis, then you have a certain level of surety that they're not taking sides, so to speak, that they are independent in their report and in their analysis and what comes back. So you can have a company that is actually providing their own COA and testing internally, and yet, you could have, just like in the biomedical industry, you can actually have test results that I'm aware of, or an industry, for any industry for that matter, that it can always be manipulated.
Yeah. And how many times has a patient demanded a COA on any pharmaceutical product? And I wonder how much of a problem this is in pills that are dispensed under prescription by a doctor over and over again. I mean, are we poisoning people on a regular basis? This is a question that people should be asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Well, look at this produce recall. Honestly, how is anybody going to know? As far as I'm aware, vegetables don't have a COA yet. There's a massive amount of the stuff being recalled right now. So on that note, I do feel that the cannabis industry is doing what it should. There's just a handful that are trying to recover their profits. And the contaminated oils are making it to market. We're seeing the vape oils make it to the market through the black market. So as you were saying, if you do have a legitimate COA and it does come up contaminated, the ethical thing to do is not sell it. However, those that are more concerned with making a profit have, and we've seen that, and we've seen the health impact of that. So we're asking everybody, from the growers to the investors to the consumer, everybody do all that they can to correct the situation, and that's by asking for the COA.
Yeah. Well, the cannabis industry has an opportunity here to be a leader. I mean, they're so highly regulated in so many ways, and in some states the testing is somewhat considered overkill, but it really isn't, because it is protecting consumers at the end of the day. And, if the rest of the agricultural industries out there would follow some of the lead of the cannabis industry and adopt some of those regulations, wouldn't you think that it would make our food supply in general a lot healthier?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm in total agreement with you. Because you see hundreds of millions of pounds of this coconut substrate product being exported annually, and this is to support the world food supply. So if we're looking at cannabis as a microcosm of agriculture, and we're seeing this problem, and we know that it can be corrected by relying on an independent third-party certificate of analysis, then perhaps that action, that behavior should be adopted for the entire agriculture industry. So I do feel that cannabis is an industry that is doing everything possible within its own regulations to self-police. There is just a handful, obviously, that we're hearing about that have chosen profit over ethics, and that's the sad part of business. So the real pathway to protecting one's health is by making absolutely sure that there's analysis of purity behind the products that they wish to purchase and consume.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, does this problem also impact the hydroponic growers, people who are growing in water-based environments as opposed to soil?
Yes.
Absolutely.
How is that?
So coconut substrate is, if you can imagine it, as it's the hairy part of the outside of the coconut, and it's the spongy part. So all of that is stripped away from the actual nut itself, and that is what gives the roots the support to grow, plant roots. So in an indoor grow environment where you have a lot of automation and controls, all of that is taking place, and you don't have the actual earth to plant the seeds in. So what is very popular and being used is coconut substrate. It's called coconut coir or coconut peat. It's a very good substrate. And in fact, there are certain European countries, the UK and Ireland, that have banned peat moss because it releases CO2 into the atmosphere upon harvesting. So they've banned the use of peat. And cocoa peat is a direct replacement for peat moss. So knowing that and knowing that it's extremely popular in indoor grow environments, when you look at the numbers, 40% came back contaminated. That's
just the 40%
more.
that we tested. We didn't test
Exactly.
every single one out there. The numbers could actually be substantially higher.
This is a huge problem.
It's a massive problem. It's a world problem. It
Absolutely.
has no geographic boundaries. It absolutely has no geographic boundaries.
And again, we're looking at how the issue becomes with how the substrate itself is processed and harvested. A lot of these coconut fields, they are intermixed crops. So they have the coconuts, and then they're growing something else underneath the coconuts and spraying them with who knows what. The husks themselves, they're harvested, and they're sitting in ponds of this contaminated river water, where they're being repeatedly washed, rinsed with contaminated river water. They're not properly dried. They're being laid out in dirt to dry. People walking along in their feet, turning, kicking it to turn it over. It's packed up. It's still moist because, these environments are humid. And so your Pythium or your Fusarium or your other unwanted goodies are now in a confined, moist environment that allows for optimum growth to start. And so you can go to get some of these bags and you slice them open and bugs come out. All sorts of other stuff comes out.
Well, also the smell of mildew.
Yes.
Yeah, that's because that's what this is. That is what this is.
Right. And also those shipping containers are prone to producing mold in organic material that's being shipped overseas. So I can only imagine that by the time it arrives in the U.S., I can imagine that it's just proliferating an even bigger problem for people receiving the substrates in the U.S.
Well, it's been really interesting, this whole education process about this, and being able to talk to a gentleman who's been in the industry for over 35 years and finding out they've even gone through extremes of ensuring humidity control in their shipping containers. How is that they have gone above and beyond. It's incredible when you really, really start looking at how this product could actually be manufactured and provided in a high ethical and quality way.
So just to give your listeners a little bit of background, there is an extensive report at plantstds.com. And what we talk about is the entire manufacturing process. So when you look at a coconut that's growing in a tree, how does it become food? How does it become a substrate? Well, the process that Jessica was describing as far as soaking the shells in order to remove the substrate material from the coconut shell, that's called retting. And retting, I've read online that it takes months of soaking this material in water. The sources of the water are undefined in most cases. In some cases, as in this manufacturer that has been in the industry for more than 3 decades, going on 4 decades, they know the process. They know where the contamination points can happen, and they're very diligent about making sure that when it goes through the retting process and they add nutrients, they dry it completely. They had a custom machine made to dry it completely. So that way, when it is packaged and it goes into a humidity-controlled shipping container, by the time the consumer or the grower gets it, there are no surprises. So there are companies that are doing it right. It's the other companies that have questionable manufacturing processes and somehow, do not ask me how, there is a major certification company out there in Europe that has certified one of the most contaminated substrates in the report. How that can happen blows my mind. If you're going to put any type of organic certification or industry certification on your product, you have got to be sure that your processes are in place to ensure purity. That's why the manufacturers go through these certification processes. So as a consumer, going through this report, and we're starting to understand and seeing where the industry is falling apart, or somebody's not paying attention. So whether you see organic on the label, which organization has actually certified that it is organic?
That's a huge issue. And it's mind-boggling, really, when you consider just how massive this problem is. And Jessica, I have a question for you. You know, with the uptick in autoimmune diseases over the last couple of decades, how much weight would this problem have in creating that phenomenon?
Well, there's multiple different aspects, I think, in this whole autoimmune disease component, because what you're doing is you are introducing foreign substances, pathogens, into our food sources, which are create low-grade infections, you're creating these various responses in your body by ingesting all these toxins and poisons. I don't want to go down another rabbit hole, which I think is really key to all of it. However, whenever you are introducing something foreign into the body, you're going to get a response. Sometimes it's a good one, and sometimes it's not so good. And here in America, we have some pretty poor quality control and some pretty poor food practices, as well as some other quality of life practices that are just abhorrible. And I'm not going to, like I said, go down the rabbit hole on this. However, I do have my thoughts and opinions, as well as I'm sure over variety of listeners